Welcome back to the Strength and Speed podcast. I'm your host, Strength and Speed owner and Mudgear Battle of the Lions pro, Evan Prepares. If you're just joining us for the first time, this is primarily an obstacle course racing focused podcast. But what we like to do is we like to bring on outside guests because, obstacle course racing is new, but mastering a skill or like mindset is not new. So we like to bring in outside guests to kind of steal their lessons learned and apply them to obstacle course racing. I'm going to bring on my guest in a second. Quick word from this episode's sponsor. This episode is brought to you by Inside Tracker. Inside Tracker is a company that tests your blood and gives you a whole bunch of biomarkers giving you a snapshot in time of how your body is actually performing. And I've used them several times before. I used them for my 48-hour Endure the Gauntlet event that I did for charity back in 2018. Used them a couple times since then. And I just had another test done this week. The Ultimate package is kind of the one I recommend. It's the most expensive, but it also gives you the complete profile, including like your testosterone and your cortisol levels, which as endurance athletes, that's super important to kind of keep track of. So you know when you're overtraining or when you're overreaching, and then you can taper down for a big event, which obviously we got World's Toughest Mudder coming up in about a month. So getting ready for that, the 24-hour endurance championships. All right, let's jump into today's episode. Joining me, I have Patrick Vuong. He's one of the owners of Tiga Tactics. And I'm going to run through his bio real quick, and then we'll bring him on. But yeah, there's a lot in his bio, so I'm going to gloss over large portions of it. So self-defense instructor since 1999. Like I said, one of the owners of Tiga Tactics there. He's also a former senior editor of Recoil Magazine and head editor of a Recoil Offgrid Magazine. During his 5-year tenure at both publications, he got to work with people, including members of special operations, basically like a who's who of special operations, right? Navy DevGru, a.k.a. SEAL Team 6, U.S. Army CAG, a.k.a. Delta Force, Marine Force Recon, U.S. Pararescue, so the PJs there. Resident knife expert. Has also written several articles for Black Belt Magazine. Has worked as a stuntman, fight choreographer, and stunt coordinator for various films. Well, we'll have to remember to ask him about that later. And then his training background is like insane, right? It's literally a little bit of everything, right? So instructor for Pekit-Tirsia Kali as a Filipino martial arts, second degree black belt in Lei Chung Chuan Fa, first degree black belt in Kenpo karate, instructor of women's self-defense, founder and head instructor of CSUF martial arts fitness class, current student of Pentjak Serak, current student of BJJ, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and current student of Muay Thai. So Patrick, welcome.
Wow, thank you. I never knew that. I've never had anybody listen off like that. So that's pretty crazy and pretty long. But thank you so much for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure.
Yeah, I'm really excited. Like I said, this is an obstacle course racing focused podcast, but because I'm in charge of it, and I get to kind of sometimes redirect it into areas that currently interest me. And currently, I have like a big kick going on martial arts, where I've been kind of working on that in between running obstacle course races, and I stumbled upon your brand, Tiga Tactics, through Black Belt Magazine. They were offering like a discount, and they had like an online training course called EDC Karambit. So everyday carry Karambit. So if you're not familiar with the Karambit knife, essentially looks like a kind of like a claw. It's like a hook knife. I would describe it as for our listeners that aren't familiar. And so I took the online course. I thought it was like really good. I was like, damn, these guys are like distilled knife fighting, which is very complex, down to like a very simple, easy to learn method. And I thought it was really good. So I've been kind of following them for the last couple of months.
Thank you. That means a lot. I'm humbled.
So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about your background first, because I think you have a really interesting and robust background in martial arts. Then we're going to talk about Tiga Tactics for a little bit. And then throughout it, we'll be kind of drawing connections between that and mastering a skill or applying it to obstacle course racing. So let's start off with why did you start training martial arts, and kind of how long has that been going on?
Wow. Like almost every other martial artist in the world, I started because of Bruce Lee. My father, who never trained, but obviously was a big Bruce Lee fan, he'd watch Bruce Lee movies all the time. So I grew up, like, I literally can't remember the first time I watched Bruce Lee, because Bruce Lee has been a part of my life since, I don't know, I'm guess a baby. And so we'd watch these Bruce Lee movies together. And one of my fondest memories is sitting on the couch with my dad watching Bruce Lee movies together. And of course, my entire family were Bruce Lee fans, and I have roughly 50 cousins, and the majority of them are guys. And so we were running around imitating Bruce Lee. We're all Bruce Lee. We're all fighting Bruce Lees. And a lot of us, as we grew older, we all became or not all of us, but a lot of us became martial artists. So I'd say there's probably 35 male cousins, and 75, 80% of us are martial artists.
Wow.
So it's just something that we do. And so you mentioned Tiga Tactics before. That's our company. That my co-founder is Conrad Bui, Dr. Conrad Bui. He's actually my cousin. So it's a family affair. It's just martial arts has just been in our family for all my life. And from what I understand from my mother, what my mother told me, my grandparents' siblings were also martial artists. So it just kind of runs in the blood, I guess.
Cool. And, I mentioned kind of running through your bio, all these, certifications. And I know on the Tiga Tactics website, it's between you and Conrad, you have, was it 12 essentially black belt equivalent in the various arts? Yeah, it's insane.
Yes. Yeah, well, it's insane because Conrad has 8 of them. So,
oh man,
for one person to have that many, and I have to, for a really long time, we didn't tell anybody about this because Conrad always said, "Well, I don't want to tell them I have 8 black belts because they think I'm lying," and I never thought of it. I always thought, man, you should tell the world how awesome you are, blah, blah, blah. And he's very humble. And, our family is not into showing off and 8 black belts or the equivalent of 8 black belts. That's crazy to think about. But then we realized that there aren't a lot of people who reach that type of achievement in one system, let alone 8 of them. And we realized we have a lot to offer because our experience is so broad, and not just the depth, but also the depth and the breadth of it. It's a combination of both. So that's kind of how we realized that, hey, we should do something about this and offer prevent people from having to learn martial arts for 40 years until they realize, if it's good or not. We cut that work out for them because we've already done it for them, and we can kind of distill it down to what really truly is realistic and what they can apply in real life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm looking at Conrad's bio right now and looking at all the black belts. I mean, these are some of these take a really long time to achieve, right? Like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's like they say about like 10 years to get that for most people. And he's got Kali and Pentjak Silat and JKD, Jeet Kune Do, so Bruce Lee's. I mean, it's just like it's insane. It's an insane list there. So, what drives you and Conrad, or I actually can't speak for him necessarily, but, what drives you to achieve such a high level in, multiple disciplines?
It's really 2 things. One is the abstract, which is the whole idea of wanting to become better, self-achievement, being the best that I can be. And I just happened to find that to be the avenue to do that was martial arts. Because of the Bruce Lee influence and just being around it all the time, that was just kind of like the natural path to do it. But I think if I weren't in a family of martial artists, it might have been through, say, hockey, or because I grew up in Canada, it might have been through hockey, or it might have been through, say, I don't know, random like archery, or can be horseback riding, or maybe, down the line, it could have been, obstacle course racing as well. But it's just that idea of like being the best that you can be, not in comparison to anybody else. That's what drives me. That's number 1. And then number 2 is being afraid of getting punched in the face or getting stabbed on the street. That aspect I didn't really worry about too much when I was a kid, but when I really started, it's really weird. I wasn't concerned about it at all when I was younger and I hadn't done martial arts yet. But as I got into my teens and I started learning martial arts, that's when I started getting scared of being in fights, which is weird. Like, shouldn't you be scared when you don't have the training? But I actually got more scared as I did more training. And the reason is I realized how there's so much more to learn. You don't know what you don't know. And so you keep learning and you keep learning. You're like, oh, wow, I had no idea if I did this, I could do this, and so on and so forth. And I kind of imagine that similar to, whether it's weight training or OCR or any of the high-level elite athletics. You keep wanting to do it because you realize you've learned more about yourself and also what is out there, what's available, and how you can incorporate that into your own training.
You ever heard of the was it Dunning-Kruger effect? Is that what it's called?
Yes.
Yeah. So essentially, it's like essentially when you know very little, and then you like learn a little bit, you have like your confidence goes way up, and then like the more you learn, you realize that you don't know very much, and you essentially plummet, and then you have to kind of like build your way back up out of that hole. So
Exactly.
Kind of like that, yeah. So tell me a little bit about all the different styles you've had and kind of, maybe what your favorite part is, or kind of who, if someone maybe doesn't take any martial arts, what would you recommend they get involved in, right? Because, I mean, just there's so many options. And as someone who's kind of dabbled in a little bit of everything.
Yeah, there are so many options, and they're not a one size fits all solution. And so what I like to say is, you got to try them out. You got to try them out. You got to do the research. You got to read the reviews and see what fits best for you and your personality, and also your body type. But for me personally, I'll just talk about it from a personal perspective and how I think that could work for other people. The first system I studied, I actually didn't get my black belt in. It's called Northern Shaolin Shun Fa, which is basically kung fu from the Shaolin Temple, and it emphasizes a lot of kicking. And it's very, actually, a lot of people say that Taekwondo actually came from that. And most people know what Taekwondo is because it's so prevalent all over the world now with a lot of high kicking. Obviously, if you're not flexible or you're kind of, leaning a little bit to the older side, it's probably not a system for you. It involves a lot of flexibility and not exactly the most realistic system in terms of street self-defense. You probably shouldn't be doing too many high head kicks if someone's trying to stab you. So that's not something that I would recommend if you're older and looking for something that's more realistic. And then I from Northern Shaolin, I went to Kenpo karate, and karate and kung fu, there are a lot of differences, but when you look at it from the outside perspective, it looks pretty similar. It's a system that has a lot. It's kind of a relatively well-rounded system. There's not a lot of grappling, but there's kicks, there's punches, there's blocks, there's elbows, there's kneeing, there's wrist locks, joint locks, and throws. So it's got a lot in terms of traditional martial arts. And so with Kenpo karate, I would, it can be a good art for most people because it is so broad. But again, it is a traditional system. You have to practice kata or forms, which are prearranged movements, which it looks like you're fighting an imaginary target, or you're fighting imaginary people around you. For some people that looks kind of hokey, not realistic, and it's not meant to teach you how to fight. But what it does is teach you how to catalog these techniques, so that you can draw them at the right time and apply them. So the fighting wouldn't be done exactly as it is done in the kata or the form, but it would be applied. So I would recommend karate or kung fu for people who are more into the culture, the martial arts, the artistic part of martial arts, right? They want to learn a different culture, and when you learn karate and kung fu, you learn a lot about the history. Karate came from technically Okinawa, which is now part of Japan. And you learn a lot about Japanese culture that way. And then Kung Fu came from China, so you learn a lot of Chinese culture that way. And they are different, but similar, again. And so you learn a lot of these different things. And my system of Kenpo karate is actually kind of like a multicultural story, but it originates from Kung Fu, China, then it went to Japan, and then it went to Hawaii, and then from Hawaii it went to America. So it's kind of mixed in, and it's a bit more of a hybrid system. And so that's interesting too, because you get to learn that path. You kind of learn like the sort of the people who studied it, their paths around this world. It's really cool. That's a big part of why I'm a martial artist. It's not just the kicking and punching and beating people up,
Mm-hmm.
So there's those aspects. And then I jumped around, did a bunch of other arts, but the other prominent one that I'm studying and teaching now is Pekit-Tirsia Kali, which is a Filipino martial art, as you mentioned. And that is an emphasis on stick, knife, and empty hand fighting. There's also wrestling, grappling, some other things in there too, and some other traditional weapons, but primarily it's the stick and knife system. And I actually recommend that for almost anybody, unless they have shoulder issues, neck issues, just because there's a lot of swinging involved. But the reason why I love Kali so much is that it's applicable. Applicable to almost any situation. And you don't necessarily have to have a knife in your hand. You can actually take a pair of scissors and do the exact same movement. You can pick up a tire iron, do the same movements, and it would still work in combat situations. So it's kind of like if you've watched Jackie Chan movies, how he uses like a ladder as a weapon. Kali is kind of like the realistic version of that, not the cinematic version, but I really like how it can be. It translates. It could be empty hand. You could have a phone in your hand. You can have an umbrella in your hand, and all the movements still apply. So those are, in terms of my traditional background, that's kind of some of the highlights that I'm certified to teach in. I've also studied as a student a whole bunch of other systems. I don't know if you want me to go through each of those, but there's quite a bit now that I think about it.
Yeah, I think most people are generally familiar with like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and essentially, from the UFC and then from like the early days of the UFC rather. And then Muay Thai is, I feel like that's fairly, I think people fairly know what that is and stuff like that, and some of the other ones. So yeah, we'll keep trucking along. So before we get to that, before we get to my next question, I mentioned in your bio some of the movie stuff you've been involved with. Anything people would know?
You can see me on Netflix in a couple of movies. Nothing big. They're all independent movies, B movies as they used to call them. I don't want to insult anybody. They're not the greatest movies. I don't want to insult the director or anything. So I don't want to name them in fear of offending them, because it was a joy to work on them. But I did those when I was in my 20s and early 30s, and it was just a really cool thing to be involved with because it combined two of my big passions, which is martial arts and movies. I love movies, and I'm also a screenwriter, so it was kind of like a cool way to combine the two. And naturally, of course, I kind of leaned into the stunt work and fight choreography just because of my background. And so I got to work with some cool people. If you type in my name in imdb.com, you'll see my list of credits and some of the movies I've been. Actually, some of the movies that you can see on Netflix, I'm not listed on there. But anyway, and it was fun. And the thing that I like to mention that I did them not because I think I'm cool or what have you, but because from a self-defense standpoint, I tell people I know what's realistic because I also know what is unrealistic, because I did this fight choreography. And a lot of people think fighting is what they see in the movies. And I tell them, no, I make that stuff up. The stunt community makes it up. They learn martial arts and they glamorize it and they make it flashy and they make it interesting to watch, because the truth is, in a real fight, it's really brutal and unpredictable and sloppy. Like in a real fight, there's no crisp blocking, there's no fancy footwork. It's just people getting brutally maimed and killed, really. Yeah. And so I like to mention that because one of the things that Conrad and I do with Tiga Tactics is myth busting. We explain why. Yeah.
I love those videos. Those YouTube videos are so good. They're like a minute, and they just cut to the point. You're like, yeah, that is complete BS. It's nice to see guys with like traditional martial arts background be like, yeah, this is what's being taught, and this is not going to work, and here's why. It's like this makes a lot of sense.
Right, exactly. So that's one of the things that we do, and it comes from the reason why these myths continue to perpetuate is because people use them in movies, and you see them in movies and you see the hero winning and you assume, oh yeah, that technique would totally work in real life. And the problem is nobody pressure tests anything. And if you don't pressure test, you don't know if it's going to work for real or not. And so that's why I like to mention the fight choreography, because I can see techniques from both sides, from both the cinematic way and also the traditional martial arts way. And I take those two and I basically, with Conrad, we basically show you what the realistic version would be.
Yeah. So for our listeners, maybe some of our normal listeners may be tracking this. So earlier this year, one of my friends is a filmmaker, and he watched the Mortal Kombat movie, was highly critical of it, and then he's like, this is ridiculous. I can shoot a better fight scene. So he grabbed me with my very limited martial arts training, and he grabbed an amateur MMA fighter, and we shot like a fight scene. It's like maybe 3 minutes long, and it was fascinating to do like choreographed fighting, because me and the MMA fighter, right? Like we want to throw jabs and these basically like straight punches to like quickest to the target, and it's like no, we can't do that. That's not going to look good on film. So we're throwing a lot of hooks, a lot more hooks than we usually, and then the two of us immediately want to like throw a couple punches, and then we get close and we're like, well, now I'm close, I'm going to take him down, or I'm going to start grappling. But again, it didn't look good on camera, so we kept having to like break apart, come together, break apart, come together, and find reasons to kind of like drag the fight out, which was it was a lot of fun. I'll for our listeners, I'll drop the link down below in the podcast show notes there. And check it out. Bobby Ross is the guy who shot it. So and it's the plot is nonsensical. We're arguing over which is the best energy drink, which we literally came up with the plot, and it was under a minute. It was like, well, why are we fighting? It's like, I don't know. Let's grab some energy drinks. And then that was the plot we came up with. So
those are some of the best short movies that I've done. It's just, you're just off the cuff. Hey, let's just shoot this real quick. And those are some of the funnest things I've ever done.
Yeah. And it was a lot of fun. And we got, so the amateur MMA dude fighting with Colt, it was like, he's like, man, I got beat up here worse than I did in my like regular fight. Because we're like, nothing's padded, and we're like throwing ourselves in the ground, and we're having to doing it multiple takes from multiple angles. And it was like I had scrapes all over my body from, something that shouldn't have hurt. And it was mostly the ground. It wasn't the actual, like physical contact. Cause we were the way they shot it, that cameras can only see in 2 dimensions. So we're actually not getting that close to each other a lot of times. Anyway, side tangent there. All right, let's jump back into, you've achieved what many would consider like quote unquote mastery in a lot of these martial arts. I know there's always more to learn, but what advice would you have for someone, whether they're training for martial arts or training for obstacle course racing, basically looking to achieve a high level in any skill? Like what kind of lessons can we draw from martial arts there?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I'd like to say I'm not a master, and that term kind of makes me cringe a little bit. And that kind of goes back to what, with my family being humble and all that humility stuff. But mastery of a skill is important. And the best way to achieve that is first to have a goal. You can't just stumble into, we'll use OCR as an example. You just say, I think I'm going to do Tough Mudder today. It's going to end very poorly for you. So you obviously have to have a goal going in. So going back to martial arts or self-defense, the goal should be, okay, I want to be good at martial arts. Okay, well, that's very broad. So then you have to narrow it down. Okay, what martial art are you wanting to learn? And is it not martial art, or do you want something less traditional? Do you want combat art instead, or combat sport instead? So then you're going from, say, Kung Fu or karate and realizing you don't want to do the traditional forms or, wear the uniform and the belt, and you want to do something that's more fight oriented, then that might become combat sports, Muay Thai, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, any of those types of sports. And so the goal is really, really important. You can't achieve at any high physical level. You can't get to that level without a goal in mind. So once you've got that goal, then you break it down. And most people say, it takes you 5 years to get good at something, or is it 10,000 hours? I can't quite remember the
10,000 hours is the one I usually quote from Malcolm Gladwell there, 10,000 hour rule.
Right. Yeah. So 10,000 hour, or for me, I usually say 5 years. So let's just say I'm starting OCR now, and I want to be great at it. I want to be a master of it. It's going to take me 5 years. Okay. So then I've got to invest 5 years of my life. I want to make sure that not just having the goal, but having the passion for it. Because if you don't have the passion for it, you're not going to ever reach that goal, because it's going to take 10,000 hours, right?
Right.
And so you've got to have the goal, then you've got to have the passion. You got to me, the passion and the goal goes hand in hand. Because if you have passion but you don't have a goal, you're going to just end up spinning your wheels. But for me, I have to be so passionate about something that I might never reach that goal, and I'll still want to do it, right? And so to me, that's the most important first step for any sort of mastery of anything, is having a goal, having that passion. And then once you realize, okay, it's probably going to take me 5 years to get to that point, how do I break it down so then it doesn't become all-consuming? because, if I wanted to become, a champion OCR athlete, looking at 5 years, that would overwhelm me and I'd want to give up. And so I have to break it down. So rather than say 5 years, I say, okay, in 1 year, I want to get to this point. And so let's say if we would go back to martial arts, in 1 year, let's say I want to get to, let's pick a system. Let's say it's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right? And say in 1 year, I want to get my blue belt, which is the step above white belt. So white belt, you're a beginner. Blue belt is the next level up. 1 year may actually be difficult for a lot of people. And in most cases it is. It usually takes you 2 or 3 years to become blue belt. But let's just say, for the sake of the argument, that it's going to be 1 year. So how do I get to that 1 year mark and reach that goal in 1 year? So I've narrowed down the goal. I've chunked it down, basically. So now in 1 year, I realize, okay, I've got 52 weeks or 54 weeks. But I have a certain amount of weeks. So then I break that down, and it's okay. I look at each week and I say, okay, well, 7 days in a week, it's not realistic for me to train every day of the week. But how many times can I make it frequently enough so that I still have that muscle memory, but I'm not, number one, not getting injured, but more realistically, not destroying the rest of my life, like friendship, relationship, work, all that stuff. So most people will train 3 to 4 times a week, right? So bam, you've got a week, you're going to train 3 or 4 times a week. Okay, now let's break it down into individual days. So now you've got the individual days, like, okay, how much time can you dedicate in that one day? And it might be, for some people, it might be 4 hours if they're lucky, but most people only have, let's say, an hour for training. And so then, okay, now you have 60 minutes. Okay, you chunk that down some more. Say, how do I take that 60 minutes and be the best I can be in that time frame? And for me in martial arts, it'd be, we've got some sort of warm up and you got some sort of cool down. So that's probably 15 minutes right there. That leaves you with 45 minutes of training. And then depending on what the art is, you break that down even further. So now you got 45 minutes. You're going to probably break that up into 2 or 3 elements. And that gives you, let's say 10 to 15 minutes on a specific concept or a specific drill or a specific exercise. And then you just rinse and repeat, as Conrad would say, rinse and repeat.
Yeah. So I love what you were saying there. There's just a lot of really good stuff. With obstacle course racing, there's so many different distances, right? There's everything from 100 meter, like Ninja Warrior, all the way up to 24 hours. And I feel like a lot of people come into the sport and they're like, well, I want to do everything. I want to do everything well, because we have a couple of athletes like at the very, very top of the sport who actually can, like, are world championship level at every distance, which is literally insane. But a lot of those guys have been training for decades before getting involved in obstacle course racing, right? They just, it looks like they're overnight successes because they were doing running and mountain biking and climbing for a decade or two beforehand, before they got into obstacle course racing. And, people come in and they're like, oh, well, I want to be as good as, they name an athlete like within a year. And it's like, well, again, that dude's been training for a decade. So let's calm down for a second. And 2, like, let's figure out what's good for you, right? Like, I don't have a lot of fast twitch muscle fibers, and I am typically better at endurance. So I tried a little bit everything that first year, and then I was like, well, I'm really good at endurance. So, like, that's what I'm going to pour my heart and soul into. Yeah. And then the 5 years is totally, like, I think a lot of people, they say the lifespan, and a lot of people in the sport is like 3 to 4 years, like 1 year to have a taste of everything. 2 years, they kind of go all in. And then by the 4th year, they're like, they're burnt out. And they've, like you said, they've ruined relationships, and, their life is a mess because they're busy traveling and racing every weekend. So
exactly.
Great
yeah,
stuff.
I think that 3 or 4 year market is really key. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's usually where people suffer an injury for the first time. Yeah, whether it's first time in their life or first time in that specific sport or art or system. And a lot of people don't bounce back from that. They're like, oh man, I blew up my knee. I don't want to do this anymore. And I find that the true masters or the true champions, at the elite level, they think of it as like, oh, this is just a speed bump.
Yeah.
And so that's really key. Having that passion, right? You're still going to do it no matter what, whether you're going to be a champion or whether you're going to be last place in every single race, right? You're still going to want to do it.
God, yeah, Good stuff. And I love also the, where you want to be in a couple of years. Cause I always say like, I know what I'm doing for the next kind of like 5 years, like the big goals on the horizon, but I don't tell people about them typically until I'm within a year. Just cause that's the appropriate time to reveal that stuff. But, like a lot of I've done all these ultra endurance charity events where like I'm running for multiple days and, high altitude one and stuff like that. And all the events that have been released year by year, again, I've been tracking what I've been doing for the last 3 to 5 years in advance. I've had the idea, just been like waiting to the appropriate time to let people know. All right,
I agree with you. That's the way to do it.
So let's start jumping into Tiga Tactics. So we mentioned you guys at the beginning, and one of the things that I can't remember if we actually recorded this part or not. Which is why I should probably stop talking before we start recording. But, if anyone's read my biography, Ultra-OCR Man from Special Force Soldier to Record-Setting Obstacle Course Racer, at the end of the book, I mention tactical training done by a bunch of guys who do Filipino martial arts. And what I really liked about them is they specifically would watch a bunch of like live leak fight footage and analyze things and then kind of pull lessons learned from that and then try to teach it to a bunch of special operators guys. And what I really liked about Tiga Tactics was you guys were doing the same thing, except you were distilling it down to its most basic element because, as a special operations guy, there's a lot that goes into my job. And being able to train on, hand-to-hand and knife fighting is not something that may necessarily be as high on the priority list as I think people think. Now that I'm later in my career, I have more free time to do some of that stuff on my personal time. But, when I was actually on a team doing stuff, I was super busy. A little bit of a tangent there. So what I want to do is talk more about Tiga Tactics. So first, how did Tiga Tactics start?
Well, that's an excellent question. I would say that it started decades ago as just like a personal goal of mine to create a self-defense company. When I got my first black belt in Kenpo karate, that was in 1999. Wow, I cannot believe I said that. I feel really old right now. But I got it when I was pretty young. But when I got that black belt, I realized I was young, so I wasn't going to create a system, or I'm sorry, I wasn't going to create a company right then and there because who's going to learn from a kid? I was in my teens at the time, so I knew I had to season up a little bit before I start teaching people professionally. So I only taught in my dojo or taught in whatever studio I was affiliated with. But I'd always wanted to teach other people, but I also wanted it to be realistic because what I knew early on in my martial arts career was that martial arts is for martial artists. Martial arts is not for fighting on the street. There is a huge difference between the two. And martial artists get into trouble when they believe that their martial art will help them on the street, I should say, will make them invulnerable on the street. It will obviously help them on the street, but it's not like a magic bullet or a magic wand or a silver bullet or a magic wand. They don't become invulnerable, and they're just as likely to be hurt if they're not paying attention. So I realized very early on there's a distinction between street fighting and martial arts fighting, and so I had to do a little bit more training, but I always had that goal in the back of my head. And then, of course, naturally, Conrad had the same goal, never told me about it. I never told him about it. And it's very much what you said before, Evan, how you have a 5-year plan, 10-year plan, 15-year plan, but you don't tell everybody in the world about it. You gotta wait until that point is, you're close to it, and then you announce it to people, or not even to announce it, but just mention it to some trusted friends. And so that's kind of what happened with Gunnar and I. We just coincidentally, same point of our life, we had the same goal, and I had just quit as the senior editor of Recoil Magazine to try my luck as a freelancer. And Conrad said, "Hey, well, now that you're not full time on a magazine, why don't we team up and do something?" So that's where Tiga Tactics started. From my perspective, I'm sure when you talk to Conrad later on, he has a much more interesting backstory on how it all started. But from my perspective, that's kind of how it started.
Gotcha. And I noticed like a lot of your, at least online training, emphasizes kind of knife defense. Kind of why did you choose to go down that route?
To be honest, knives scare me the most, which is very ironic because I'm a huge knife nut. I love knives. I've loved knives since I was a kid. The first knife I had I was 8 years old and it was a Swiss Army knife. But yet I was like deathly afraid of it too. It's a really weird dichotomy. When I started learning about, martial arts and Taoism and yin and yang, my whole obsession with knives, it made sense now because there's this like obsession about it, but also this great fear of knives. And it continued as I started training further on, because I realized all these arts and all these self-defense systems I was learning didn't really have a good answer for how do you defend yourself against a knife. They thought they did, but then when I tested it with my friends or my classmates or with Conrad, we realized that it kind of fell apart. These quote unquote ancient techniques from samurai. Nobody pressure tested it. They just kind of accepted it because that's what their sensei taught them. And there was no skeptics, there's no questioning, and of course the big part is there's no YouTube for thousands of years, right?
Right.
But YouTube and the whole like World Star and all these websites, Live League, they changed the world. They changed the world of self-defense, because now you can really see how criminals are attacking. And sure, before YouTube, I would read a lot of books and read magazines, but you just don't get the same type of information from the written word as opposed to the visual. And so when we watched, again, independently, because I didn't know Conrad was doing this too, we independently watched these surveillance footage or these cell phone footage of people getting stabbed, and it was brutal, and it scared me even more, but they were also very predictable in how people with knives attack. And the reason why they're predictable is because most people who stab another person with a knife, they're criminals. They're not martial artists. They're not good people. They're not police officers or military. They're criminals and thugs. And criminals and thugs do not train. And if they don't train, then they're going to all attack in a very similar way, because they're just relying on basically innate caveman responses. And so we started analyzing them, watching as many videos as we could, and we realized, wow, there are actually patterns here. And if you're observant enough, you can actually formulate a solution around that problem. And that's kind of why we emphasize knife defense and using a knife, because the knives scare me the most.
Yeah, no, I love that. And, like I mentioned before about kind of, watching videos and coming up with a solution. I think you guys just did that so well. And, it's really interesting, and I like how. So I've taken a couple of your online courses, my spare time, and I like how you and Conrad will differentiate. Be like, well, here's some academic stuff, and I love academic, the 16, 24, but however many angles of attack there are, right?
Right.
They're like, but here's what's happening on the street, because we based it on real footage, and like that model of just kind of like watching what other people are doing, kind of analyzing. Like I use that for obstacle course racing too. Like when I started writing my first book on obstacle course racing, I would literally just watch the Elite Wave after I'm done, or go back and watch the YouTube thing and be like, all right, well, what's the top 10 guys doing that's getting them through this obstacle fastest, right? And like you start seeing patterns, and you're like, well, this is what's working, and it's working for a reason. And
right.
So, and then just kind of also like breaking problems down in kind of their smallest part, and then kind of figuring out solutions from there. So, yeah, a lot of that started from that tactical mindset seminar I took. Let's see, it was probably over 10 years ago at this point, but I've referenced it again in the back of my book. So, yeah, it was super cool. And like I said, I liked. So the guys that taught that seminar they were a little more academic as far as like the angles of attack and how many here's where I'm stabbing and stuff like that. And what I liked about you and Conrad, you're like, here's what you need to know. Like, if you don't have much time to train, here's what you train on. These three things. Boom. Like let's get it done. And the way the program was set up online, it was cool because there's like these short, like 3 to 10 minute videos, and then it stops, right? So you can watch it, and you don't have to like rewind the DVD or like, like it was just really easy to use. And I take martial arts class, but then I also kind of supplement it with books and like I said, online training and watching YouTube videos and stuff. And I really liked just the format it was set up, and it was super easy to digest and practice and kind of go back and reference. So,
wow, that's awesome to hear. Thank you so much. Yeah, the whole idea is to make it as simple as possible. We call it caveman simple because in a fight, that's really all you've got is the innate caveman like responses. You know, you've got the adrenaline dump. You're going to have, you know, tunnel vision and lots of, you know, in some cases, lots of hearing, lots of fine motor control. And so the way that you move is going to be very limited. And so it's really important to watch footage and like you were saying before, model it, you know, after how, in my case, it would be how criminals attack, and in your case, how elite athletes tackle this one particular obstacle. And you know, I'm sure you've done a lot of research and training on your own in terms of like how to get higher levels of achievement. And a lot of them say that all you have to do is watch the best of the best do something, and you will actually physically become better just watching them, because your brain is modeling their movements as well.
100%. Yeah, mirror neurons. I reference that in my book. 100%. Yeah. So it's a real thing. The Alan Richardson basketball study experiment. If anyone wants to go check that out. Yeah. Yep. Good stuff. So one other thing I wanted to mention. So during one of the online courses, you're like, here are the two angles of attack. Like, you need to practice a lot because that's what you need the most. And so I'm taking Kali a couple months. I've been taking it for the last couple months. And like I watched that video, and maybe a week and a half later, my instructor, again, you know, he's teaching all the academic angles, and he's like, listen, here are the three angles of attack you should know that I use when I'm actually like spar with someone. And I was like, this is unbelievable that the two of you guys said the same, like almost word for word, the same exact thing. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think if you look at any sort of physical endeavor, you'll realize there's a lot of different ways to tackle something. But at the end of the day, you know, you only, as Bruce Lee said, you have 2 arms and 2 legs, and so you're only going to move in a limited amount of ways. And so it's really about finding the 2 or 3. We like to teach things in 3s. Tiga Tactics actually means 3 tactics. So we like to teach things in 3s because it's easy to remember. But it's not just easy to remember as a student. It's also easy to remember when you've got that adrenaline flowing through your body. So if you can, you know, isolate, you have so many options. If you isolate down to just 2 or 3, you're in a better spot. You'll be more effective. You'll be faster.
So have you read Colonel Grossman's book On Killing or On Combat?
You know what? I've wanted to. It's on my wish list. It's always sold out everywhere I go. Like, I can never find it. So I hope to read it soon.
So I would definitely check that out. So I read it back in 2007 or something like that. And I just, I have Audible, and I just downloaded both of them again and listened to it. And I like it. I liked it even more the second time. And for our OCR athletes, what was really interesting was a lot of like the high stress situations that he talks about in combat, which I've experienced, but not as many because you actually don't get shot at that much overseas. Most days are pretty boring. But a lot of the same physiological stuff, like basically high stress, high focus, when they were talking about combat in the book, I could relate a lot of those things to racing. It was like, I've literally experienced the same thing, but in a race. Just because, again, you're focused, your heart's going, and you revert to whatever you've practiced kind of type of thing, you know, or fall to the level of your training or rise to the level of your training, whatever you want to call it there.
Right. Yes. Very true.
So what differentiates your brand from similar companies that are out there? Because obviously there's a lot of like self-defense type companies besides your extreme amount of experience between you guys.
Yeah, that again, I don't want to sound like I'm patting myself on the back and how, you know, we're so cool and awesome, but I think the big, huge difference is that because we have so much depth and breadth of experience, we can bring to the table a lot more of what does work and what doesn't. You know, when you're learning, say, just one specific style, like say Krav Maga, right? You've only done Krav Maga. You think Krav Maga is the answer to everything. Yeah, again, not to say anything bad about Krav Maga specifically. I'm just using that as an example because Krav Maga is pretty cool. But you know, you assume that Krav Maga can answer everything. It's like the typical metaphor of like, you know, when you've got a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yes,
but because
absolutely. So
you know,
I'm going to jump in for a second. So the military has the same problem because we're like,
Uh-huh.
Oh, was there like the tanker? It's like, oh, there's a problem. I'll send my tanks in. And like even in special operations, we're like, oh, you're having a problem. I'll conduct unconventional warfare. You know, it's like it's not the solution every time, guys. Like different solutions to different problems. So all right, sorry.
Exactly. Exactly. No, and that's very true. And so the reason why we're unique is because we have, we're certified in 12 systems, but obviously we've trained in a lot more. So theoretically, we're bringing, I don't know, 20, 30 systems with us whenever we look at a problem, and then we teach you the solution to that problem. So we have a lot more to offer than, say, one instructor who's only done one art or two arts even. I'm sure, Evan, you're probably finding this yourself, is like when you go to try to find an instructor, they might be certified in one or two, maybe three at the most. It's really difficult to find someone who's certified in 4 or 5. In our case, we have 12, and so that is a bonus if you're one of our students, because we have, when you have enough experience, you see things differently than someone who's only done one system or driven down one road in their entire life, right? You just can't see the entire world when you're only driving down one street. So we that's number one, is just the depth and breadth of experience that we can bring to a real life self-defense situation. And then the second is that we do the research on how criminals actually attack. And that's kind of the sad part. A lot of self-defense instructors, whether they're traditional martial artists, combat sports guys, or quote unquote combatives guys, they just regurgitate what they've learned and assume that that's the right way to do it. But they haven't done the research, and they haven't done the pressure testing. So like we said, ever since YouTube came out in 2005, that's 15, 16 years ago, we've been watching violent real life attacks. And we know, generally speaking, how most criminals will attack with a knife, with a sucker punch, with a club or a bat, or with a gun. There's a very specific way that these criminals attack, because, again, they're untrained. And because they're untrained, they're going to fight in a very specific way. It's very innate, very natural, very caveman-like. And a lot of these martial artists, they look at us and they're like, "Oh, well, what do you know? What if I did this and what if I did that?" It's like, "Well, oh, you're the what if guy." Like if I were to fight another martial artist, honestly, I'd probably die. We're two martial artists with tons of experience. We both pull out knives. We're both dying. Sorry, man. Like, that's just the way it goes. But why in the world would I want to fight another martial artist? Like, we are, as martial artists, we're technically the good guy. We're trying to be better people, and we're trying to teach people to be better and safe. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense when other martial artists especially, criticize us and say, like, "Oh, what if I did this and what if I did that?" It's like, well, you live in a fantasy world, dude. Because why are two martial artists? This is not a movie. We're not dueling. It would be like, why would two special operation guys be fighting each other? Like, unless they're working for different countries, right? That never happens. Right. We live in a civilized society where the good guys tend to be good, and so you shouldn't be dueling. This is not the 1700s anymore. So the fact that we do the research, we watch how criminals actually attack, we figure out the problem, and then we use our vast experience to solve that problem in ways that we can give you very quickly. So we've taught seminars, one day or 2 day seminars, and we've taught everybody from martial arts masters to absolute beginners, like housewives and older men who've never trained before. And within those 2 days, by the end of that day, they're physically doing the same movements that those martial arts masters were doing. So I'm not saying that they're high-level athletes all of a sudden, but the fact that they can pick it up very quickly is a testament to how simplified we've made things. So to me, those are the two big differences: is the experience and then the realistic research and training.
Gotcha. Good answer. So again, we've got a lot of knife qualifications and certifications, and you saw a lot of stuff. So do you have any recommendations? I know this is probably a huge topic for, everyday carry knife. Like what knife, what brands or styles kind of do you carry, or do you recommend people carry who do? I know that's a huge question, because you write reviews on knives all the time. So, but I'm also a knife nut. So like in Boy Scouts, our troop was known for carrying an obnoxious amount of knives. And I still have a collection I have a small jewelry armor upstairs that's filled. There's no jewelry in there. It's just knives. So it's like, at one point I had 80 knives, and then I started giving some away, and I think I'm down to like 60 now. So, yeah.
That's awesome. We should totally do show and tell someday with, just me and you. But Yeah, no, that's a huge question. That could actually be the topic of a whole podcast, to be honest. But we always try to say that, number one, you should look at the laws in your area, because every city, every county, every state has a different law. And, some, I would say, bonehead martial artists, like, oh, who cares about the law? It's all about saving your life. Like, if you need to use it, you just use it. And it's like, well, that's great. That's fantastic. You live in a fantasy world, because here we have a thing called the police and the legal system. And if they don't arrest you and put you in jail, then the victim's family will sue you. And so you've got to deal with that legal, ethical, moral framework whenever you choose a knife. And so number one is find out what the laws are in your area, and then choose the biggest knife within the law, within what the legal means. And I personally would recommend fixed blades, because once you draw a fixed blade, there's no safety mechanism, there's no on switch, there's no ammo to load. It's live, good to go right away. So fixed blades is what I would recommend, but of course, in some areas, fixed blades are illegal unless you say open carry, which I don't recommend. So if you can't do an open carry, if you can't do concealed carry with a fixed blade, then you go into the folder knife realm, which has even more options, and that can get really crazy and intricate, and we can talk a really long time about that. But generally, you want to get a folding knife that opens as quickly as possible and as safely as possible. And most people tend to find that the Emerson Wave feature is the knife that does it. So for those of you who don't know what that is, if you picture a knife, there's on a spine, there's like a little hook or a wave, because it looks like a wave crashing, that catches on your pocket as you pull the knife out. So it catches on the corner of your pocket, pulls the knife out, the blade out, as you pull the entire handle out of your pocket. So theoretically, it's like a fixed blade, because it comes out right as you finish the draw. Yeah. Whereas with other folding knives, you have to pull it out, and you have to push a thumb stud or push a thumb hole to get the blade out all the way. Then you have to re-grip, and then so it takes like 4 or 5 steps. But with the Emerson Wave, it takes basically 2 steps. You grab the knife, pull it out of your pocket, then re-grip. So those the Emerson Wave feature, any of those knives that have something like that, those are called pocket deploy knives. And so I would generally recommend something that has a pocket deploy feature on it if possible. But there again, is it legal in your area? Does it fit your hand? Is it comfortable? The length, all that. There's so many considerations. So I can't say specifically what brand or what model.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I mentioned I had given away some of my knives. Some of the ones I gave away was specifically because I was like, well, I can't carry this. This is illegal, right? Like it's a dagger. It's got 2 edges, or it's got knuckles on it. And I was like, well, why do I have this if it's just going to sit in my closet the whole time? And I did keep some of those, because some of them are like fantasy knives, right? They have like spikes in random places, just wild stuff, right? Yeah, I'm glad you said the fixed blade stuff, because I switched over to that a couple years ago, and just again, for the easy, you take it out and then it's out, right? There's I'm not messing with buttons or anything, and
exactly.
Yeah. So the night I met my wife, she was carrying a Benchmade folding knife, which was nicer than what I was carrying at the time. I was carrying some like United Cult, the Tonto knife or something. So that's how I knew she was going to be my wife. Her knife was like $100. Yeah, I was like, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I was like, and I choose you. So okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Awesome.
So starting to run low on time here. So what do you guys got coming up for Tiga Tactics, and kind of how can people get involved?
Yeah, absolutely. The right now we're looking forward to our EDC Edge Weapon Seminar. It's going to happen on October 16th to 17th in Orange County, California, Southern California, and that is a 2-day event in person where we teach people how to select, carry, and most importantly, deploy a knife. I think the vast majority of knife instructors, they don't teach how to deploy the knife, which to us is the most important part, because if you can't get the knife out in time, what's the point of even carrying your knife? You're gonna get stabbed, shot, or punched before you can even get the knife into play. So, and again, I've done tons and tons of classes and seminars, and 99% of the time, the the instructor started with the knife in his hand and said, okay, let's go. Knives in the hand. Let's start doing our Sinawali's, our patterns, our forms, our sparring, whatever have you. So it wasn't very realistic from a civilian standpoint, right? Because who walks around with a knife in their hand,
right?
Unless you're working in a field or you're a psycho, your knife is probably going to be in your pocket 99% of the time.
Legally, you're going to be viewed as the aggressor. I mean, if you're walking with it out, it's going to be like, well, that guy had his knife out when we started fighting. It's like,
yeah, exactly. So that's the focus of the seminar is like, how do you get it out safely? How do you create space? How do you know when to do it, when not to do it? And then also the legal, ethical standpoint of carrying a knife. So that's happening October 16th and 17th at Rounders MMA Fullerton. And then after that, we've got some really cool courses coming up. We like to offer courses in different lengths. So we have short courses, which are generally about, when you add up all the videos, they're roughly about an hour and a half to 2 hours. And then we have medium-sized courses, and then we have what we call our flagship courses, which are the nuts and bolts of the Tiga Tactics Combatives program, which are right now stab-proof, club-proof, and punch-proof. And stab-proof obviously teaches you how to defend against a knife. Club-proof teaches you how to defend against blunt weapons like hammers, sticks, crowbars, things like that, baseball bat. And then punch-proof is our defense against sucker punches and haymakers. And I would actually, again, knives scare me the most, so we kind of lean toward stab-proof. But I would actually recommend most people learn punch-proof because a sucker punch is probably the most common weapon used on the street by thugs and criminals. Mostly because if they get arrested, they don't want to have a weapon on them and get charged, possession of weapon and, assault with a deadly weapon, all that stuff. So most of the time, and we just recently reviewed the FBI stats because they just released them, I think this week or last week, for 2020. And the vast majority of the assaults were committed with what they call personal weapons, which is fist and feet. And so punch-proof solves that problem because we teach people how to watch out for the telltale signs of an incoming haymaker or sucker punch. So we have those right now available, and then in the probably the next month, we're going to work on some other really cool courses like a machete course, a grappling course, how to use a tactical pen, and also a flashlight, how to use a flashlight in self-defense. So some cool stuff coming up. Hopefully people can subscribe to our newsletter, and they'll get updates on those. And that's at tigatactics.com.
And then where can people follow you or Conrad, social media links or anything like that?
Oh, yes. So on Facebook and Instagram are probably the two best platforms that we use right now to stay in touch with us. Facebook is just /Tiga Tactics, and on Instagram it's at Tiga Tactics. And Tiga is spelled T as in Tom, I, G as in George, A as in Alpha, Tactics. And I forgot to mention real quick that we have a special promo code for your listeners.
Yeah, let's drop it.
Yeah, if they go to tigatactics.com, they click on the link for our online training center, our online courses. They use the promo code Strength and Speed. They will get 50% off our seminars and 50% off our flagship courses.
Nice.
Again, the promo code is Strength and Speed. The word and is spelled out. It's not the ampersand.
Gotcha. Cool. Yeah, and we'll drop that again we'll drop some of those links in the show notes below, and then along with the code, so people can reference it later and hopefully click on it and learn a thing or two. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that'd be great. We'd love to have your listeners join us. And we're looking at 2022 right now and 2023 for our seminar. With things opening up again, we're going to try to do kind of like another seminar tour. So we're looking at different spots throughout the country where we can fly to and teach in person. Because I personally prefer to teach in person, but obviously with the convenience of internet training, a lot of people like online training as well. So.
Yeah, I mean, in person is always better. But like I said, I think for me, you may not be able to find in whatever area you're in like specific types of instruction. So that's how I I kind of found you guys, and that's why I enjoyed it. And then it allows me to, like I said, supplement whatever I'm learning in an actual classroom.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So the last question we're going to ask, I'll give you one more chance to plug anything you want before we go, but tell us something people would be surprised to know about you. So kind of the more random, the better usually. So
this is super random and has nothing to do with anything we talked about, but I've never had a cavity in my life.
That's insane. That's literally insane. I ate a lot of candy as a little boy, and I have a lot of cavities. And when my wife wants to scare my children, she's like, look at all the cavities in Dada's mouth. And then they brush their teeth some more. So
that's awesome. That is awesome. That's a great, it's a great role model, right? They learn by seeing you in action. So yeah, brush your teeth, floss.
Yeah.
But no, I've just never had cavities before. And I've since, obviously grown up and made friends with dentists, and they say that it can actually be a genetic thing. And some people are just predisposed to getting cavities and some people aren't. So.
Gotcha. My mom had a lot of cavities too, so I'm going to use that as an excuse.
There you go.
Good stuff. All right. Before we get going, any final shout outs you want to give, friends, family, sponsors, any articles or stuff you got coming up? Obviously, we mentioned the seminar, which I had a race that weekend and the race got canceled. Now I have a martial arts test that weekend, so I was actually going to fly out, but now I'm not. So I'm hoping to make one out in 2022 once you guys release those dates. But go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. I would just say two things. One is for your listeners who are interested in self-defense, study anything. It doesn't necessarily have to be with us, though if you go to tigatactics.com and use strength and speed promo code, you'll get 50% off. But seriously though, I'm a big advocate of training in person, and so when you train with us in person at a seminar, we'll actually tell you, hey, find a local gym and train every week, at least once a week, preferably 2 or 3, 4 times a week. Because right now with how crazy the world is, all the stuff that's happening, it's really important to be proficient in personal protection. And it doesn't necessarily mean, how to stab somebody, how to punch somebody, but just being situationally aware and being having that mindset of, hey, I'm a sovereign person. I don't want anybody to mess with me or my family. And training is really what allows you to turn on that mindset. So that's number one. And number two, we both Connor and I do a lot of writing in certain self-defense magazines. So follow Black Belt Magazine. That's, as a personal thing, I grew up reading that magazine, so it's a huge honor to be published in it. And Evan, you're also published in there as well. So
I am, yeah. Not the most academic of articles, but like you said, I had an article come out. It's probably 2 issues ago. It's called "Bring Back WMAC Masters," so an old, kind of like the equivalent of professional wrestling, but for martial artists. And they had like a PSA in every episode. It was kind of like wholesome, like G.I. Joe. And I want to reboot, so I wrote them an article, and they accepted it and published it, which was super exciting. It's like my first. I have a ton of articles on obstacle course racing, like 300 plus. But that was my first kind of martial arts related thing. So, and Black Belt Magazine is everywhere, right? Like that's a really big publication. So that was really cool for me. So yeah.
Yeah. So check out Black Belt Magazine. I also write for, I used to be a senior editor for Recoil Magazine. So check that out. The sister publication is actually several sister publications. One of them is Concealment Magazine. So I have something coming up in that. I think it should be published before the end of the year. It's on surprise attacks, how to watch out for them. The other magazine that I write for that company is Recoil Offgrid Magazine. Some people just call it Offgrid Magazine, and that's more of a urban survival type magazine, and just general preparedness and understanding how dangerous the world can be, and how do I become more secure, more safe for my family. So that's another magazine to check out. And then last but not least, because we're teaching a EDC edge weapon course, we have training knives. We obviously use training knives, not real knives in training. So check out Keen Edge Knives. The owner there is a Steve Rollert. He's a long-time accomplished martial artist, but also a master bladesmith, literally master bladesmith. He's got that certification. So all our training knives branded Tiga Tactics training knives are manufactured by Keen Edge Knives. So check those out. Check out the magazines. Do a lot of research and hopefully train every week.
Yeah, I've got one of those keen edge knives, the trainers, and it is awesome. I was like, well, what's trainers don't make it. It's just a flat piece of metal, but so it's legitimately significantly better than the I bought some crappy one off Amazon, some Karambit training knife, and I don't like that one. I always use the one I got from you guys, the keen edge ones. So highly recommend that. I'll double down on that one. And then for any of our listeners, I mentioned some of the kind of similarities between combat and obstacle course racing. I have an article coming out on Mud Gear. If you want to check that out, it talks about some of those similarities in a little more depth, referencing some of the material written by Colonel David Grossman on combat. And also, I obviously started writing for Mud Gear, so you'll see more of my articles on mudgear.com website. Just released one on different sock lengths and why you should choose a specific style for specific races, and one on rucking. So any of our listeners are into rucking, so walking with weighted backpacks, some kind of beginner mistakes that people tend to make when rucking, which I don't actually do that many rucking events, but I have a lot of experience from the military because they forced me to do that. So yeah, a lot of experience there, usually sometimes against my will there, but part of the training. And then we talked a lot about kind of combat and self-defense and stuff like that in this episode. For any of our listeners that are more into that combat mindset, my book, it's my biography, Ultra-OCR Man from Special Forces Soldier to Record-Setting Professional Obstacle Course Racer, is out. It's on Amazon, hard copy, digital, or Audible, so you can find it on any one of those. I'll also drop that link down below. Patrick, thanks again for coming on. That was super exciting for me personally. I hope our listeners enjoyed it as much as I did. And great talking to you, and hopefully I will see you in person instead of online in 2022.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It was a big honor. I think you are a true badass. Thank you for your service. I hope to one day obviously meet you and train with you, but learn some of your techniques in terms of OCR. I don't plan to do it anytime soon, but I think a lot of those things can also apply to my own training. So thank you again. I really appreciate it.
All right. Right on. We'll catch you later.